We've had a great stretch. We're already here. I hope you're already at home.
Okay. If you were to ask most people what comes to mind when you mention Australia, I think the usual response you would get would be the bush. Or maybe it's the wildlife. Of course, if you were to ask an Australian what they think about our country and why it's different to other places, I think you'd get a very different answer. They would tell you that Australia is about the people. And one of the things about the people that makes us unique is our easygoing attitude. People would also probably mention mateship. In such a large country with so few people, it's kind of ingrained into us that we need to look out and look after people who may be stuck or in hardship without being able to access help so easily. Well, this is my love letter to Australian music. You know, after the US and the UK, few other countries in the world could have claimed to have had such an impact on popular music. Some bands you may be familiar with. Other artists you may be surprised are Australian at all. I've heard Americans say to me countless times that they think that some of these bands were just one-hit wonders. In doing so, they've missed out on some of the greatest albums ever produced. It's also an introduction to understanding the lucky country, as we call it down here. Maybe you're thinking of visiting or working or even living in Oz, and you're wondering, well, what is it that makes up an Australian? How are they different or the same as me? Beyond the superficial things that I mentioned in my introduction, there are a few better avenues into the Australian psyche, its history and people, than our own music. Maybe sport as well. For Australians, many of these, of course, will be familiar. But I've purposely made sure to avoid the most popular albums, simply based on sales alone. I mean, you already know them, even if you're from overseas. Or those albums may have great singles, but the rest of the album is just filler. I want the best artists, the best albums. They've got to reflect the broad range of all the band can do. I will, however, mention the most popular when I can in passing, and why I wouldn't choose that album for me. I mean, Born in the USA was Springsteen's most popular album. Was that the best? We're going to span 40 plus years, starting in the 70s. when I started my love affair with Australian music. I've owned most of these albums myself at one time, and they've got to meet the following criteria. Sorry, New Zealand, I could have done a whole series on you alone. And I'm also going to be avoiding some artists who have lived most of their life and had their major success in other countries offshore. I'm going only off the Australian releases, not the American or the UK versions. With those, they generally rearrange the order of the songs, and they'll even add older singles on. Unless albums of that year have great songs from start to end, I'm not putting them in. So if certain years don't make the standard, we'll move on to the next year that does. What can I say? Some years are packed with groundbreaking albums, and then other years there are droughts. Others will be given an honourable mention, but only my preferred album will be given a full video. That's another topic, but for me, there's nothing better. Search online for as much context as you like. This is not a history lesson. I'm only here to give you the vibe of that album and the artist by sampling each track. The rest is up to you. Also, with copyright issues, it's kind of a miracle I can present anything at all to you right now. So please, please, give this a like and a subscribe, blah, 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 just because I need to know that all this effort is worthwhile. That's cheating. I might make an exception or two because these are not strictly greatest hits albums, but you'll see why. I grew up in a musically obsessed household. My dad loved jazz. My brother created one of the first and longest lasting independent music stores in Adelaide, South Australia. It's called the Seeing Ears. I played around that shop like a kid in a candy store until my brother finally let me work there part-time. I also DJ'd and I worked at a small local radio station in the country playing independent music, and I played in several bands in my 20s. I was even considering a career as a rep for the music industry before another job took me away. Above all, this is a personal journey with the albums that have had the greatest impact in my life. To my Australian audience, your choices for the best bands or the best albums will be different. After all, it's all subjective. I think the thing to take away is, at the time, we just took it for granted that this would last forever. As we go, we're going to build our own collection. Each video, we will add to it each time you watch, and you can always go back to it and reference it later. You want to add your own ideas? Feel free to comment below. It usually makes a fun debate, and I'm sure I've missed some along the way. I hope that you add these classics to your collection and you end up loving them as much as I do.